How do you tell the difference between a man who has nothing left to lose and a man who is actively trying to lose everything he has? That's the persistent, heavy question that hung over Elara James like the inescapable, salt-laced fog of Port Townsend, Washington. She was a single mom who knew the acrid, metallic smell of desperation, the scent of bills you couldn't pay, the pervasive odor of fear. She just didn't realize she was falling for a man who smelled like concrete dust and honest, hardworking sweat, but was actually trying desperately to bury a billion-dollar legacy under a mountain of lumber and drywall. Elara, 32 years young, but with eyes that held the weary wisdom of 50 years. Her hands were permanently rough, etched with the scars of honest labor, paper cuts from endless office files, minor burns from the espresso machine steam wand, and the dry, chapped texture from industrial cleaning chemicals. Her life wasn't some breezy, feel-good Hollywood romance. It was a meticulously balanced, perpetually strained ledger. Every single penny had to be accounted for, every single hour of the day stretched and contorted to its breaking point. Her biggest, most urgent problem wasn't the abstract difficulty of finding true love. It was the concrete reality of finding an extra $55 for the mandatory school trip to the historic lighthouse on the peninsula, a trivial cost that loomed over her financial security like a dark storm cloud. She lived in a tiny, faded clapboard house on the less frequented, perpetually wine-battered side of the bluff, a place where the paint peeled with stubborn defiance. She was raising her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who possessed a laugh that truly sounded like a bright, melodic cluster of wind chimes, an innocent, joyful sound that was Elara's only true luxury. But Lily also carried a heavy burden, a mild, congenital heart condition, the kind that wasn't immediately life-threatening, but required consistent, highly specialized medical consultations in Seattle, expensive prescriptions, and the constant, nagging anxiety of potential future surgeries. Elara's greatest personal attribute, her very identity, was her fierce, almost terrifying resilience. Her greatest, most paralyzing fear? That one day, when Lily needed her most, that bedrock of resilience simply wouldn't be enough. The thought was a sharp, icy splinter under her skin, always there, always throbbing. The magnificent, aging Victorian structures of historic Port Townsend, architectural marvels clinging dramatically to the steep hillside, were in a constant, never-ending state of restoration. They required a perpetual cycle of structural repairs, fresh paint, plasterwork, and sprawling scaffolding. This meant a steady, year-round flow of construction work, which was, in theory, a lifeline for the local economy. What wasn't good, what felt like a direct, malicious strike against her, was the new landlord, a completely faceless entity, a giant corporate LLC from Seattle, known only as Olympus Holdings, had just unilaterally hiked her rent by a staggering 20%, demanding the increase within 2 ridiculously short weeks. It was the kind of cold, predatory move that felt less like justifiable business practice and more like a cruel, targeted joke by some distant, uncaring god. How, Lilybug? How am I supposed to stretch a nickel into $1 when they keep moving the finish line? She whispered desperately to her sleeping daughter one night, her finger tracing the small, pale scar near Lily's collarbone, a constant, tiny reminder of her fragility. The payment deadline was looming like a cliff edge. She needed a legitimate miracle, or, failing that, a legitimately high-paying off-the-books third job that didn't demand the 25th hour of her day. The sheer physics of her survival felt impossible. That's precisely when the impossible walked into her life. She first met him as Jax. Just Jax. No last name needed. He joked with a casual, easygoing shrug when they first encountered each other over a lukewarm cup of coffee. He was working construction, one of the rugged crew renovating the grand, century-old fountain building right in the heart of downtown. She'd initially seen him during a torrential downpour, soaked to the bone, his muscular frame straining as he expertly wrestled a massive, wet structural beam into its precise place on the scaffolding. He looked rugged, a masterpiece of sharp angles, undeniable physical strength, and rough, deliberate edges. His deep, remarkably steady gaze seemed to miss absolutely nothing. He wore the standard uniform of a working man, mud-caked, worn-out Carhartt pants, faded flannel shirts, and boots so scuffed and battered they looked like archaeological artifacts. He drove an ancient, beat-up, rusty Ford pickup, the kind of vehicle that clearly belonged to a man who was living paycheck to paycheck, precisely like her. There was a simple, uncomplicated honesty about him that was deeply appealing. Their first real conversation began outside the Blue Heron coffee shop. Elara, utterly exhausted from a grueling double shift, was momentarily leaning against the cold brick wall, trying to summon the strength for the long walk home when Jax approached. "That coffee in your hand looks like you needed it sometime last Tuesday," he'd commented, his voice a low, melodic, gravelly sound that, impossibly, made her exhausted stomach perform a startled flip. It wasn't explicitly flirtatious, just completely and disarmingly honest, a shared recognition of the grind. "It's just the first of 3 scheduled for today," she'd replied, managing to force a tired, brittle smile. "Gotta keep the beast fed and the rent paid. You know the drill." He studied her then. The way a master craftsman studies a blueprint, really studied her, his eyes looking past the worn apron, the faded jeans, the forced smile, and straight into the tired, almost depleted soul beneath. "I know that feeling intimately," he said, his tone simple, devoid of judgment. "Tell you what, Elara, the foreman is useless with paperwork. I need someone to help me organize the endless material receipts and inventory logs for this colossal job. It's mostly late-night hours, just administrative paperwork, totally off-the-books cash payment. The job pays well, better than cleaning offices, I promise you. Are you interested in the opportunity?" The pay he offered when he named the figure was genuinely insane, a miraculous intervention. Easily triple what she was currently making scrubbing floors and emptying bins. It was enough, not just to cover the soul-crushing rent hike, but to actually, finally, start building a small, precious savings account specifically dedicated to Lily's unpredictable medical future. It felt less like a job offer and more like a celestial lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. It felt, to her cynical, battle-weary soul, dangerously too easy. She recognized the scent of a trap, but her fear for Lily was louder than her caution. Elara accepted the job instantly, suppressing the little, hysterical voice in her head that was screaming massive red flag louder than any fire alarm. Jax was quiet, utterly professional, always respectful, and kind to the very bone. He started bringing Lily small, beautifully detailed, hand-carved wooden animals, a tiny, expressive sea otter, a fierce miniature hawk, objects she cherished with an almost religious intensity. He never, ever asked about Lily's absent father, never pried into her personal history. He only ever asked about her dreams for the future. He became the quiet, unshakable anchor she hadn't even realized her fragile life was desperately lacking. He made her feel safe, genuinely seen, for the first time since Lily was born. One frigid evening, while she was sorting through a massive pile of crumpled, greasy invoices under the single, harsh fluorescent light in the site trailer, Elara noticed a singular, out-of-place piece of paper. It was a formal, certified letter, peeking out discreetly from underneath a heavy stack of lumber receipts. It wasn't about structural steel or drywall. The letterhead was heavy, embossed with a severe, aristocratic-looking crest, and the address boldly printed below was the unmistakable, prestigious 5th Avenue in Manhattan, New York. The intended recipient? Jaxon Thorne. Just as her curiosity, a dangerous thing, compelled her to pull the letter out to read the contents, the heavy steel door of the site trailer swung inward with a jarring clang. Jax walked in, stopping dead in his tracks, his entire body language transforming. His usual calm, easygoing demeanor was instantaneously gone, replaced by a cold, impenetrable, hard mask she had never witnessed. His eyes, usually so warm, so deeply comforting, were suddenly shadowed, intensely guarded, and the darkness she saw in them felt like a profound, physical threat. "Don't touch that," he said. The words measured and flat, his voice a low, terrifying warning that sent a shiver of pure, cold dread rocketing down her spine. He moved with a startling, predatory speed, snatching the formal letter with a blur of motion and ruthlessly crushing it into a tight ball in his fist. Some things in life are better left completely buried. He looked directly at her then, and for the first terrifying time, Elara realized the kind, gentle man she was deeply, irrevocably falling for wasn't just struggling, wasn't just poor. He was profoundly, actively, and dangerously hiding. And the terrifying, palpable weight of his secret was demonstrably heavier than any structural steel beam he'd hauled that day. The true mystery had just begun to unfold. That cold, tense night in the small, cramped trailer, the fragile, simple warmth Elara had so carefully built with Jax, was instantly frozen over. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Jax offered a clumsy, inadequate apology, blaming the extreme weather, the frustrating delays, and the insane stress of the construction deadline. But his hurried explanation felt as thin and transparent as the morning's coastal fog. He became even more guarded, more withdrawn, yet his fundamental commitment to her and his gentle devotion to Lily never, ever wavered. He kept up the administrative help. In fact, he dramatically doubled her already generous pay, insisting with a strange intensity that it was necessary because of the truly unreasonable late hours and the complexity of the inventory. Elara desperately needed the money, and her daughter Lily adored him with an innocent, wholehearted trust. So she stayed. She kept sorting the receipts, but now she wasn't just an employee, she was an amateur, very nervous detective, sifting through the evidence of his double life. She kept staring at his hands, not just the expected calloused, work-worn palms, but the almost imperceptible fleeting silver glint on his left wrist whenever he absent-mindedly rolled up his flannel sleeve. It wasn't the rugged Casio watch of a foreman. It was a subtly engraved heavy titanium cufflink, a tiny, exquisite detail that screamed old money and exclusive wealth, in a way his beat-up Ford, his muddy boots, and his tattered jeans never ever could. The contradictions were a constant, dizzying assault on her reality. Their rapidly deepening relationship became defined by these strange, jarring contrasts. They would spend their evenings after her multiple shifts, huddled together, quietly eating greasy, delicious takeout burgers on the waterfront benches, watching the giant, lit-up ferry glide silently toward Whidbey Island. She would open up to him completely, pouring out her struggles, her consuming fear of not being an adequate or capable mother, her anxiety about Lily's future, and he would simply listen. He listened with an almost unnerving, quiet intensity that felt more profoundly intimate, more soul-bearing than any passionate kiss or grand gesture could ever be. He didn't offer platitudes. He gave her practical, surgical advice that was far too sharp, far too strategically brilliant for a simple construction foreman with an 8th grade education. Stop cleaning those major corporate accounts for minimum wage, Elara, he had advised her one chilly evening, while meticulously sorting through a stack of her office cleaning invoices. You are fundamentally selling yourself short. Your specialized time and your flawless reputation are demonstrably worth more than you're charging. Immediately raise your rates by 30%. Charge exactly what you are worth, no excuses. And if they dare to balk, if they complain, then you walk away. Someone else, someone with respect, will pay it. I promise you. She surprisingly took his intimidating advice. She nervously raised her prices across the board for all her cleaning clients. The manager of the major accounting firm, the same man who chronically complained about everything from the temperature of the coffee to the brand of hand soap, actually paid the increased rate without a single question, surprised but immediately accepting. She saw the first real, undeniable, tangible spike in her humble savings account balance. Jax was doing more than paying her cash. He was teaching her to profoundly value herself, a foundational lesson that was infinitely more precious than the cash he quietly slipped her every Friday. It was a transformation of her mindset, and Lily was absolutely thriving. Her worrisome night coughs became less frequent, her energy levels soared, and her pale cheeks gained a hint of healthy color. Jax had somehow, miraculously, found a truly top-tier specialist in pediatric cardiology in Seattle, the absolute best in the entire Pacific Northwest, he claimed, who was mysteriously a personal friend of his and could see Lily right away, bypassing the 6-month waiting list. He insisted with zero negotiation on covering all the necessary transport costs, the expensive ferry tickets, and the entire consultation fee, adamantly claiming the whole thing was merely a simple, standard favor to a fellow worker's devoted family. The regular hospital visits, which used to make her sick with paralyzing anxiety and financial terror, now felt strangely manageable, almost routine. The fundamental fear of Lily's complex medical condition hadn't completely vanished, but the paralyzing fear of absolute financial failure had. Then came the afternoon where the mystery, the heavy secret, began to crack. Jax disappeared abruptly from the site during his lunch hour. He returned hours later, much too late, smelling faintly, distinctively of the most expensive, bespoke cologne she had ever encountered, and with a pronounced, unnerving tremor in his strong hand that no amount of heavy construction lifting could possibly account for. He was agitated, pacing the length of the trailer. I need a complete break, Elara," he muttered, running a rough hand through his dust-caked hair before collapsing heavily onto a nearby stack of fiberglass insulation. Elara sat down quietly beside him, a silent, comforting presence. "What is this, Jax? What is truly going on inside you?" she asked gently. He didn't look at her. Instead, he stared out with an intense, vacant gaze at the unforgiving gray waters of the Puget Sound, his profile dark and tormented. "I had an entire other life," he finally confessed, his voice dangerously low, barely a ragged whisper. "A life where my name, my actions were a completely different kind of monster, a corporate monster. I was a destroyer of opportunity. I made ruthless, calculated choices that crushed ordinary, decent people. People exactly like you, Elara." He then confessed that he wasn't a construction worker. Not really. He was, as he put it, a laborer. He was physically building things with his own hands, a profound, exhausting act he considered a necessary penance, an attempt to connect to something fundamentally real, something honest, something constructive. He admitted that the name Jax was merely an abbreviated, protective shield for Jaxon. He still conspicuously didn't mention the official last name she'd seen on the crumpled Fifth Avenue letter, but the profound self-loathing and shame in his eyes eloquently told the rest of the complicated story. "I am here, Elara, to find out if I am even remotely salvageable," he finished, the brutal confession hanging heavy and poisonous in the cramped air. To see if a man who grew up in the kind of staggering, unimaginable wealth that makes people blind to basic humanity can actually truly see the struggle of others and not instinctively attempt to profit from it. "I'm trying to become an honorable man." He didn't reveal his actual fortune. He didn't mention the secretive CEO title. He only confessed that his entire past was dark, ruthlessly corporate, and permanently tied to profound greed and financial manipulation. He felt he had utterly lost his soul, and he had come to the rugged, honest environment of Port Townsend to try and physically dig it out of the dirt, one shovel of cement at a time. And Elara, the single mom who had fallen deeply in love with a clearly broken, tormented man, understood the emotional calculus. His partial honesty, his act of laying bare his profound shame, felt like an act of deep, profound trust. Elara realized in that moment that their deep bond wasn't about the presence or absence of money or social status. It was about raw, shared, vulnerable truth. The complex, hurting man in front of her was in unimaginable emotional pain, and she loved the rugged, broken edges of his exposed soul. The final piece of their small-town miracle clicked dramatically into place when the landlord's monolithic LLC sent the final official eviction notice. She showed the cold legal paper to Jax, her hands shaking, completely distraught. He took the paper, his eyes scanning the name of the LLC, Olympus Holdings, and his strong jaw instantly tightened, his expression turning to glacial, terrifying stone. "Do not worry about this, Elara," he said. And this time, his reassurance wasn't delivered with the casual, comforting tone of a construction worker. It was delivered with the chilling, absolute certainty of a man who didn't just understand the game board, he owned it. This matter is officially done the very next morning, as Elara was preparing to open the Blue Heron coffee shop, a sleek, entirely out-of-place black Mercedes S-Class, the kind of expensive, intimidating vehicle that was practically unheard of in laid-back Port Townsend, pulled up dramatically to the Fountain Building construction site. A woman stepped out, impeccably dressed in a tailored, aggressive suit, with severe, pulled-back hair, carrying an official, gleaming silver briefcase. She looked exactly like she belonged on the cover of Forbes magazine. She marched straight past the stunned, dusty construction crew, her sharp eyes scanning the site until they instantly locked onto Jax, who was currently covered head to toe in sawdust and struggling to carry a large bucket of screws. "Mr. Thorne," the woman announced loudly, her voice sharp, professional, and utterly devoid of patience. "I have been trying to reach you on every secure line all night. The entire board of directors is in an absolute, unprecedented panic. We need you back in New York immediately. Olympus Holdings, your father's company, is being relentlessly investigated for hostile, predatory real estate practices, and your father is desperately demanding you sign the documents to take over as full CEO before the entire scandal publicly breaks. You cannot, Jaxon, keep hiding on a backwater construction site pretending to be a foreman." Elara dropped the heavy glass coffee pot she was holding. It shattered on the floor with a terrifying, definitive crash. The name of the predatory landlord's company. The mysterious formal letter. The Black Mercedes, the CEO title. Jaxon Thorne. The kind, quiet man she loved, the humble laborer who shared his burgers, was the secret son of the faceless, ruthless billionaire who was actively trying to kick her and her daughter out of their modest home. The sound of shattering glass. Elara's dropped coffee pot provided a sharp, definitive silence that immediately cut through the usual noise and chaos of the entire construction site. Every hammer stopped, every voice hushed. The air was thick with tension, sawdust, and the devastating realization of a profound lie. Jaxon Thorne. The full, intimidating name, not the familiar, comfortable Jax, slowly turned. His face a complex mask of exhaustion, shame, and a profound, weary resignation. He looked deliberately from the impeccably tailored, furious woman to the stunned, dust-covered construction crew, and finally, his gaze landed, heavy and guilt-ridden, on Elara, whose face was a study in pure, unadulterated, heartbroken betrayal. "Elara," he began, his low, once comforting voice now sounding rough, strained, and entirely unfamiliar. "Please just let me explain everything to you." The impeccably dressed woman, who introduced herself with severe corporate formality as Cassandra Vane, Jackson's long-suffering chief operating officer, didn't afford him the necessary privacy to do so. She stepped forward, her expensive high heels crunching on the gravel. "He owns it all, Ms. James," Cassandra stated flatly, gesturing with a frustrated, sweeping hand to the entire worksite, the town, and perhaps the world itself. "He is the majority shareholder of Thorne Industries. We don't just specialize in building towering skyscrapers. We also own the investment arm, Olympus Holdings, the very firm that has been quietly buying up and aggressively gentrifying the older properties here. He is, unequivocally, the billionaire CEO who has been completely slumming it, as he calls it, playing at poverty, trying desperately to find himself after an absolutely massive, paralyzing corporate ethics failure at his father's company. That entire dark past he vaguely mentioned, it was his father's doing. A stain he's trying to frantically scrub off his name, but he feels the impossible, crushing burden of it all. Elara felt the blood physically drain from her entire body, leaving her feeling dizzy and frighteningly cold. The name of the predatory company, the mysterious high-profile letter, the immediate, terrifying connection. "You knew," Elara whispered, the accusation a sharp, devastating blade slicing through the humid air. Her voice was thin, reedy, barely a ghost of her former strength. "You knew Olympus Holdings was the nameless, brutal force arbitrarily raising the rent. You knew, Jaxon, that I was facing imminent, complete eviction. You were the goddamn author of my suffering, and you played the savior." Jaxon took a shaky, involuntary step toward her, his eyes now truly swimming with pain, desperately pleading for understanding. "When I first discovered what Olympus was doing to this community, to you, I immediately initiated the process to stop it. The entire system is profoundly rigged, Elara. I was forced to buy out my father's stake in that real estate division, not to evict you, but specifically to dismantle this entire predatory, ruthless side of the business from the inside out. That is precisely why I am here in Port Townsend. That is precisely why I sought you out and hired you. I truly believed I couldn't just tell you I was the CEO without you instantly thinking I was some kind of heartless monster, but I had to be physically close enough. Deep enough to orchestrate the internal fix." Elara's anger, initially a scorching flash fire, was quickly and painfully doused by a cold, deeply profound, numbing hurt that went straight to her core. "You thought my love, my genuine affection for you, was something worth testing?" she cried out, her voice cracking with the emotional strain. "You truly believed I was too shallow, too materialistic to look past a wallet, so you had to meticulously construct and maintain an elaborate costume? All those intimate, late-night conversations we shared, were they merely data points for your privileged little corporate soul salvage project?" Genuine hot tears welled up and began to track slow, painful paths through the thin layer of coffee dust on her cheeks. "My daughter's delicate health, my constant gnawing struggles, my genuine poverty. They were not some abstract academic corporate crisis for you, Jaxon. They were my actual terrifying life. And you made a calculated, executive decision to lie to me, fundamentally, about who you were. Every single day, Jaxon looked utterly, profoundly broken, collapsing his weight onto a nearby stack of stacked wooden pallets. He finally pulled off his worn, filthy, tattered work vest and tossed it away as if it were contaminated. "I deserve that harsh judgment, Elara," he choked out, his voice thick with raw emotion. "Every single word of your accusation is true. The simple raw truth is I came here hating my name, absolutely despising my vast money, and desperately wanting to know if a woman like you, a woman who fights with honor for every single dollar, could ever see any genuine worth in a man like me, a man who was handed everything on a silver platter. I wasn't testing your character, I was brutally testing mine, and in the process, I fell deeply, irrevocably in love with a woman who didn't care one iota that I drove a beat-up, rusty Ford, only that I was a kind, supportive listener. That is the honest truth." He stood back up, pulled a small, official-looking folded document from his jeans pocket, and offered it to her, his hand trembling uncontrollably. "I couldn't just tell you the whole truth. Not yet. I knew I had to fundamentally prove it with irreversible actions. This is the official deed to your house. I quietly bought the entire block back from Olympus Holdings subsidiary and immediately shut down their predatory operations. The rent hike is nullified. The lease is void. It's yours now, Elara. It's Lily's home, free and clear. It's not a grand romantic gift from some mythical billionaire. It is a desperately honest apology from the man who loves you, forever letting you fear the financial storm his terrible name created." Elara looked down at the heavy, official deed, then back up at Jaxon. He was standing before her, no longer Jax the common laborer, but Jaxon Thorne, the powerful, highly successful, yet profoundly terrified CEO. But he wasn't standing in some inaccessible corporate tower. He was standing in the dirty construction mud, wearing the clothes of a man who had genuinely tried to be fundamentally better than his past, a man determined to use his power for good. She saw the exact same genuine, raw panic in his eyes as the night she almost discovered the letter. He hadn't been afraid of her discovering his exorbitant wealth. He had been deeply, intensely afraid of her, judging the immense, corrupting power that wealth represented. She walked slowly up to him, not for an immediate, forgiving embrace, but to look him straight, unblinkingly in the eye. "You don't get to erase the last few honest months of our relationship with a piece of paper, Jaxon," she said, her voice now steady, completely devoid of tears, a testament to her renewed strength. "You do not get to simply buy your way out of the fundamental lie you told me. But here's the unavoidable truth. You didn't just quietly pay my salary. You gave me the necessary courage to profoundly value myself. You fixed my oppressive house situation, yes, but you began fixing me first. You showed me a different path to survival." She took a long, deep, cleansing breath, the sharp salt air from the sound stinging her eyes. But she didn't flinch. I fell deeply in love with the kind, quiet, supportive man who whittled small wooden otters for my precious daughter and told me my time, my worth, was more valuable than I realized. That essential good man is still profoundly in there, Jaxon, and he is the only one I am willingly giving a painful, complicated second chance. Jaxon had no choice but to leave for New York that day, boarding the black Mercedes to face the relentless music, the intimidating boardroom, and the terrifying mess of his family's past. He had a vast dynasty to painstakingly clean up, a notoriously ruthless company to ethically transform, and a stained, powerful name to desperately redeem. But this time, the separation was profoundly different. Elara walked him all the way to the waiting Mercedes. She didn't drive away in her little car, curled up in fear, wondering if he would ever truly return. She stood tall, a woman who had just realized she owned her own humble home and, more importantly, truly owned her own immense worth. As he got into the imposing black car, he paused, looking back at her one last time, the weight of the moment heavy between them. "I'll be back home, Elara, I promise you, with everything I am. I have to go be the necessary billionaire CEO first, so that I can, with a clear conscience, finally come back home and be your honest construction worker." She smiled then, a genuine, true, hopeful smile that reached her weary eyes. "Just make absolutely sure you bring the little wooden otter carving you owe me." Jaxon Thorne wasn't merely fixing a corrupt company, he was rebuilding a profoundly damaged legacy. One painfully truthful, honest block at a time, for the fierce, wonderful single mom in Port Townsend who had taught him that true, lasting value isn't measured in arbitrary billions of dollars, but in the rare, transformative kind of love that can truly mend and redeem a broken soul. If this story touched your heart, resonated with your soul, and made you feel the power of true resilience, don't forget to subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next powerful story of love, redemption, and profound new beginnings.